chapter 31. This chapter is going to conclude the theme that we've been working on for this is the third chapter, which speaks about breaking down the Sitra Achra. 2 chapters ago, the Alter Rebbe introduced us to the statement in the Zohar that if the block of wood does not catch fire, smash up the block. That is, of course, sometimes we can increase the fire, but sometimes it's the crassness and thickness of the block of wood that prevents it from becoming engulfed in the flames. The nimshal, the lesson being, the fire is our passion for godliness. The block of wood is that which is naturally crass and clogged and is hoping to be caught on fire, but is prevented from doing so because of how thick and crass it is. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about, well, if a person makes this kind of harsh self-analysis, they may wind up feeling a little badly about it, or worse or harsher than a little badly. They could start to feel really down in the dumps and potentially run into the dangerous characteristic called atzvus. Atzvus translates as despondence. I think in the English they use the word depression. I try to avoid that word because there is a medical condition called depression that we're not talking about here. We're not talking about a biochemical issue. We're talking about a sense of hopelessness that leads to either cavalier dismissal, oh well, c'est la vie, or just as dangerous, a sense of there's no point in trying and I'm never going to succeed, and a surrender. And we're trying to avoid either of those characteristics. So whatever English word fits, whether it's depression or despondence or something along those lines, that's the characteristic that we have already talked about as being verboten. And the Alter Rebbe is going to address that if a person is going to make this harsh self-analysis, what about running into atzvus? What about that danger? And the Alter Rebbe will talk about how we could even possibly tolerate that on a temporary basis if it becomes a springboard for doing something that much greater. And that's why it only comes now at the end, meaning it is a potentially dangerous thing, but like we'll talk about, it can be utilized in a possibly positive manner. Now, chapter 31, it begins with the letter Vav, and that suggests that it's a continuation, like the letter Vav as a prefix in the Hebrew word means and, meaning we're still continuing that same theme about knocking down the animalistic soul that clogs up and has a tendency to prevent us from experiencing a passionate relationship with Hashem. Remember the term timtum halev, the clogged heart, the hardened heart, much like Paro in the parshas that we're reading now. So the Alter Rebbe says, V'hine, af im k'sheyarech harbe lahamik benyanim hanal, k'shtav v'shayim. Even if a person, as a result of following our instruction to subdue the Sitra Achra, to try to even transform the darkness into light, he'll do it for an hour or two. Now, as we know, every word of Tanya is precise, and the Alter Rebbe doesn't just use cliches. So when he says an hour or two, he's talking about, again, this is not a limit, it's a suggestion, but there's a difference between an hour and 2 hours, and it's not just more hours. The first hour would be for that which is rather obvious, the sholosh klipos tameas legamri, that which completely obfuscates any sense of godliness. The second hour is when the person digs deeper into things that are far less obviously distractions from godliness, as we have talked about so often, that even permissible indulgences lead a person astray from their relationship with Hashem, because indulgences are self-important. And when my indulgence is about me, even if it's kosher, the act takes me away from godliness because I'm consumed with self. So when the Alter Rebbe says an hour or two, again, he's not just talking about how much time on the clock. He's talking about really two different levels. The first level is when we have to do some self-analysis about basically straight up averas. Shalosh klipas tameis lagamre, those actions where godliness can't even be imagined. Yes, of course it's there because there's godliness in everything, yet its godliness can't even be imagined. The second hour or the second tier is for the far more subtle distractions from godliness when we are thinking about ourselves, even though I wasn't doing nothing all the other kids wasn't doing. I mean, I'm doing the things that I'm allowed to do it. But my buffet line, my favorite buffet line analogy, it's kosher, 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 but it ain't so kosher. So what will happen? Liyos b'nemichas ruach v'leiv nishbar. So this will result, hopefully, and again, this is where the danger comes in a lowliness of spirit and a broken heart. Now, 2 points which are important. First, this word broken heart. Remember, we've talked about it before. In English literature, the term broken heart means disappointed. But in Torah literature, it's the opposite of Pharaoh and his hardened heart. In our parashas, we're talking about Pharaoh's hardened heart. We want it to be broken. So broken heart has a very completely different implication in Torah talk than it has in English literature. So don't confuse the two. That's a very, very important. That's A. B, the two different stages, Nemichas Ruach and Leiv Nishbar, are a reflection of these two different tiers of self-analysis. If, in fact, the person is dealing with Shalosh, Klipas, Tameis, Legamre, 3 completely thick ply concealment, where you can't even imagine that God is there, basically straight up Averas, this needs to have a broken heart because Averas come from a clogged heart. Like Paro is denying the presence of Hashem, even as we'll read in this week's parasha, even when his own people are telling him, look, Paro, it's over, give it up. Egypt is being destroyed, but Paro becomes so what we would call stubborn and hard-hearted that there's no penetration of godliness. So the antidote to that is the broken heart. The nemichas ruach, which again is a softened spirit or something along those lines, is the response to the second hour, which is the less aggressive forms of distraction from godliness. Again, indulgence even in permitted things, which don't require a breaking of the heart, but they do require a toning down, like calm down, man, take a break, take a breath. Now, what's a potential fear, which the Alter Rebbe is going to mention here? Yavoy liyedei atzvis gedola. The fear is, and again, this is a classic pushback, it's like never go to the gym, there's germs there. This is a bit of a pushback that the Alter Rebbe is addressing. The person could be fearful that if they're going to do such harsh self-analysis, they're really going to, like we say, look in the mirror, they're really going to do an accounting, they're going to be atzvis gedola. Now, what is atzvis gedola? So atzvis, as we mentioned before, is this word, whether they translate it as depression or despondence or surrender or I give upness, whatever it is, again, whatever specific English word, and we talked about before. What is an atzvis gedola? What does it mean to be really atzvis? And the issue there is that it has no simcha whatsoever. Now, generally speaking, as we have talked so much about, and it's really right there, I should say, in the first few lines of Tanya. You recall that the opening line of Tanya that describes the oath that minister to the neshama prior to its dispatch into this physical world, which is to be a tzaddik and not a rasha, and to tell him that even if the whole world will tell you you are a tzaddik, be in your eyes like a rasha, to which the Alter Rebbe asked the question, but if I consider myself a rasha, I could come to atzvis. So atzvis has been an enemy from the very beginning, literally the first few lines of Tanya. So here the Alter Rebbe is addressing the concern that if I'm going to do this harsh self-analysis, I'm going to come to atzvis. There's no way out. Throw up the pencil, I give up kind of thing. And there's no simcha. So atzvis is itself a problem because it brings me to giving upness, and it prevents me from serving Hashem with any enthusiasm or joy, which is necessary, not only because I prefer it, because I don't like to be down in the dumps, but because the only way to get beyond my intuitive, natural, instinctive self is to have enthusiasm. So the Alter Rebbe is saying, well, again, his strategy seems to be fraught with danger. The Alter Rebbe says, "Lo yichesh, don't be afraid of that. It's true this could happen, but don't be afraid. Why? Why not? Atzvis is klipa, simcha is kedusha. So why is it wise to direct somebody to a behavior that is innately the product of klipa? Atzvis is a klipa behavior. It's a denier of God. Why would we direct somebody to engage in that kind of behavior? This seems to be, quote, irresponsible. How do we know that this is the case? Because regarding Kedusha, it says, Oiz v'chedva b'mkoimoi. Oiz, strength, and chedva, also like a form of passion, is in its place. So a hallmark of holiness is joy and simcha. Not to be confused with frivolous, silly nonsense, not to be confused with that, but simcha. Again, not just because we like it and we don't like to be down in the dumps and we don't want to hang around with a bunch of depressed people with long faces, but because simcha is a spur to go beyond my ordinary pre-designated self. And that type of process of going beyond my ordinary pre-designated self is necessary in order to do what Kedusha does, which is, again, take me beyond my instinctual self. And the Alter Rebbe doubles down on this. So you see, we don't like Atzvis, but it could be a useful tool. But to wean us away from it, I know it sounds bizarre, but there can be something attractive about Atzvis. There's something that feels or could feel like a sense of holiness to talk about how terrible I am. I'm so terrible, I'm so bad, I never do it, I'm that, and so on, which I know it sounds bizarre, but there's a certain self-absorption there that the animal soul likes. It also tends to wind up on a lot more sitting on the couch than going out and doing stuff, because who am I that I should go and help the world? I'm a failure and I'm lazy and I'm incapable and incompetent and blah, 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 blah. So the Alter Rebbe reminds us, that godliness is only present when there is simcha. When we even have this halachically, we say it every day in the davening, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. We have to serve Hashem with simcha. Now again, don't confuse simcha with silliness. And simcha is not just pleasures about, I have to serve Hashem with fun things. It's about an attitude, about an enthusiasm and so on. And that is definitely the side we come down on. So the Alter Rebbe is sort of building a case against his case. And this is a standard form of analysis, Talmudic analysis. It's sure it exists in legal analysis as well. This thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You raise a point, then you challenge the point, and you come up with some greater understanding. So the Alter Rebbe made his point about berating the Nefesh HaBahamis. He's now sort of pushing back against that with the awareness that this could lead to atzvis, to I surrenderness, and then we're going to come up with a synthesis, a conclusion. So here the Alter Rebbe says, it is true, of course, that atzvis conceals godliness. However, there can be a positive side to atzvis. There can be a way to discover the noiga within the atzvis. Remember our term, an important vocabulary word. There is klipa, means a shell. If I look at a walnut, I don't see the food, I just see the shell. But then there are other levels of klipa that are not as thick as the walnut shell, and that I could imagine that there's food underneath that peel. an orange peel, whatever, take your pick. Meaning, if you never ate a walnut before and I brought you a walnut and I told you this was food, it would be hard to imagine. And the only way to access it is to smash the shell. You got to smash it completely. But if I brought you, again, an orange, a banana, whatever it is, you could imagine that there's food in here. Yes, you have to peel away, but it's not as inaccessible as it is in the walnut. I don't know if it's the perfect analogy, but I assume everybody gets the basic point. Ipso facto, the Alter Rebbe is telling us that atzvis is klipas noiga. It does not announce godliness. It seems to push back against godliness. However, we can extract some godliness from it. Now, there's a saying. There used to be a guy who lived here in Chicago. He retired. He was a criminal defense attorney. And his ad in the Yellow Pages, how long ago it was in a big ad, said, "Don't talk to the police. Call me." Meaning, if the guy gets pulled over, he's already in trouble. So, right. I'll get in trouble. You're already in trouble. The point being, atzvis in this circumstance, the person who's experiencing this timtum alev, he's already in trouble. Right. We wouldn't recommend it. Perhaps an analogy is like medication. There's a saying, all medicine is poison, which is why if a healthy person takes medicine, they'll get sick. But what happened? The person's already sick. So we're trying to attack the sickness without harming the tissue. Never be chas v'shalom. Something like radiation or chemotherapy. Those are terrible. But the person's in a worse situation without it. So the hope is to get rid of the bad without damaging the good. Chas v'shalom, it should ever be necessary. So too, this person's in timtum alev. They're already clogged up. They already feel distance from Hashem. So now, because of the extremity of their circumstance, we are ready to reach into a more extreme, potentially dangerous strategy to employ atzvis, something like medicine that we always tell you to stay away from. Meaning, if medicine makes the sick person healthy, wouldn't it make the healthy person even more healthy? Well, not, right? That's why you got to keep your medicine locked up in the medicine cabinet. Again, if you follow the analogy. So, the Alter Rebbe says that since it's this person who's experiencing timtum alev is because of their spiritual disappointment in self, because they feel themselves spiritually disconnected, so it is worthwhile to run the risk of dealing with atzvis, which is usually a bad thing, in order to address the badder thing of his timtum alev. Again, like my medicine thing. So here we go. Well, in the bracket, therefore the Al Rizal writes, Shafilu daiges ha'avoinus enu ruya ki'im b'shas havidoy v'lei b'shas ha'tfila v'talmud Torah shetzarach liyos v'simcha sh'matzad kedusha dafka. So much so are we like, do not try this at home, and do not take without a prescription, and do not attempt this cavalierly. Be very cautious about it. The Arizal says that even if a person is worried is not even strong enough a word, they are pained by their spiritual failings, they should not allow those spiritual failings to distract them during their davening or their Torah study. And this reflects back on what we talked about 2 chapters ago. The animal soul, the Yetzer Hara even more so, will commonly attempt to distract a person from their godly service. Will always attempt to detract the person from their godly service. And one of the strategies is to feign piety. How can I daven? Don't I know that last week I was short-tempered with somebody? How can I study Torah? Don't I know that I look out the window during the davening and I'm not really paying attention? And therefore the Arizal says that although it may feel very virtuous to feel so badly about my spiritual failings, do not fall into that trap when I'm engaged in Torah study or davening. When I'm engaged in Torah study and davening, if I allow myself to fall into that trap, I'm going to be distracted from my service of Hashem. And therefore, again, this atzvus thing, now that we recommended it, we give you 10 steps, tell you don't ever do it. It's somewhat similar. We'll read about it in a few weeks when Hashem speaks to Aaron about going into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. We know only the Kohen Gadol, only on Yom Kippur, went into the Holy of Holies. So first it says, you should never go into the Holy of Holies. And then it says, in this way you should go. Well, what do you mean? Just said never. Right. First it has to be never, never, never. Now that it's never, 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 now we can dabble into it. And this is a similar mechanism that the Alter Rebbe is employing for the description of atzvus. Never, 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 never. Okay, now that it's never, 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 here's a little baby step that you can use it. So this quote from the Arizal is a reminder about how cautious we have to be. Because again, the Yetzer Hara will sometimes portray himself as very virtuous. I'm only here to help. And again, I know it sounds twisted and upside down, but there can be an attraction to feeling badly for what a bad, sinful person I am. And that's really a self-indulgence. I know that sounds upside down, but it's because I'm just thinking about myself. I'm so bad. You know what? Don't be so bad on your own time. Meanwhile, this person needs your help. But I'm so bad. How can I help another person? How can I daven? How can I study Torah? Sounds like the person is so self-degrading that they must be so holy. They're not so holy. On the contrary, they're just being self-indulgent. Okay. Now, the Alter Rebbe adds here, this is in fact a strategy. And again, this is not the first strategy that we recommend. We've recommended many other strategies. But this person's still experiencing Timtum Alev. So it's a strategy, of course, yes, but it's a dangerous strategy to be handled and applied with great caution, which is to repress the Sitra Achra with its own sense of self. That is, with maybe Gimel Klipas Tameis itself, to confront it head on, and something that is comparable to it, which is the Klipas Nega, which we will explain. But again, this isn't the first thing we recommend. And we said, no. Now we're going to say a little bit, and we'll see. Like it says, like it says, from within it itself, there is, and again, this was a prophecy that was first given to Ovadia, where Hashem said, the handle for the axe comes from the forest itself. It was popularized by a song, which I will not sing for you. But this is a message. It was a prophecy given to Ovadia. Now, curiously, Ovadia, it was his name, but the words mean servant of Hashem. He himself was a convert who came from the nation of Edom, which is basically Rome. Whether or not it's in southern Italy, but it's culturally Rome. Recall, Edom was the name given to Esav when he had the soup poured down his throat. So Edom culturally means raging indulgence. The word most literally translates as the color red. And therefore it's like this aggressive, indulgent kind of thing. The story that it says here, or that this is quoted about, that the one who did it is of himself, is the best way to translate it, is the Gemara tells a story that there was once a man and he killed a snake. And they said, the one of himself killed itself. Now, it's like in the schoolyard, takes one to know one. It's one of those ambiguous phrases, whether this one was considered complimentary, to say he was able to redirect the power of the snake to kill the snake, or sure, he killed the snake. He's a killer. So if the guy's got an aggressive character, we make him the butcher because we just redirect it. But again, the idea is that sometimes, and again, there can be, after 27 cautions, there can be a value to grasping onto the um, the character of the klipa and grasping onto the character and using it against the klipa itself. Now here we go. Regarding this, it says, a quote from the David Hamelech, "B'chol eitzav yehei moisar." In all eitzav, you see that word, that's the word for atzvis, depression, sadness, despondence, failure, all of that word, there can be profit. Now, we're very cautious about this because it sounds like, and again, I know it sounds silly, but maybe you've even observed it, where the person becomes so self-consumed with how bad they are that they are distracted from doing mitzvahs. So b'chol eitzav yehei moisar means the virtue, the benefit, the profit that comes as a result of eitzav is the simcha ba'achar eitzav kilakama, the simcha that comes afterwards. So there's not a virtue in the eitzav itself, the depression, despondence, in itself, but it can become a tool to combat this timtum alev, this clogged heart. It can become a tool if it is turned against itself properly. But, a million cautions, as we said. Now that we sort of have your attention by encouraging something that could lead to atzvus after we have spent many chapters saying never, 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 terrible, terrible, terrible. Now we are ready to venture out and nuance this point. But this is like the attention grabber, that the Alter Rebbe would encourage something that could lead to atzvus, but again, not for the atzvus in and of itself. Atzvus is a tool, again, atzvus, the depression, despondence. Atzvus is a tool that will potentially, hopefully lead us to something beneficial. Ach be'emes, the truth is, ein leiv nishba mariris hanefesh arechuka mior pnei Hashem slabshusha b'sichra achra nikroi b'shem atzvus klal b'lashon hakodesh. So the Alter Rebbe says, I mean, this is like a joke, just kidding. Not just kidding entirely, but when we use that word atzvus, which is an attention grabber kind of word, it's like saying all medicine is poison. What? It really gets our attention going. The Alter Rebbe says, the truth is, meaning we get down to it, when we talk about the broken heart, which is the good thing, remember, and the bitterness of the soul, which is a good thing in this context. I know in the English phrase, these sound like things that are terrible. And again, we don't mean bitter like angry and nasty. But there is a value in a person doing some self-analysis and seeing their distance from Hashem. That does have a value. When a person sees about his distance from Hashem and how he has become invested in the Sitra Achra, this is not really what the word atzvus means. It's not really a fair usage of the word atzvus. And again, we could all think of what's the word, like explosive terminology to describe something that's healthy and innocent. But if a person wants to be witty / nasty, they come up with some harsh term, and it's an attention grabber. Instead of saying we'll both benefit, we say it's mutual exploitation. What? It's an attention grabber. And I don't mean it to be silly, but here the Alter Rebbe is sort of like toning it back down. We've kind of recommended a guarded form of atzvus, and the Alter Rebbe is saying it's really not atzvus. And remember, just like on the upside, there's a very narrow divide that we have to be cautious about between simcha and nonsense. And they're not the same. On Purim, there seems to be like this great encouragement for nonsense. Not in Chabad. Rabbi Yoel Kahn, who's sort of like considered the great expert in the teachings of Hasidus, would say Purim is for seriousness. For nonsense, we have Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, we encourage the kids to be, silly and so on. So it's important that we don't mistake atzvus for this like depression, and it's a real delicate thing Just like happiness can easily become silliness. Just like orderliness can easily become cruelty. And just like kindness can easily become smothering. Again, remember the spheros are amoral, not immoral. They're tools. And the proper usage is dependent on how we employ them. And the difference between employing them in a healthy, godly way and employing them in an unhealthy, essentially self-serving way is very, very thin. And the Yetzer Hara makes it very confusing. So am I being a nice guy by letting the kids stay up late, or am I just being lazy because I don't want to get into an argument with them? Am I being orderly by demanding everybody, or am I just being mean? And so on. Same thing, Atzvis, Marira, Simcha. Okay, we got the point. Here we go. Ki Atzvis, he shuliba mitumtum ke'evan. The word Atzvis really would mean, the way we use that word, is that the person's heart is as clogged as a stone. Vein chayis beliboy. There's no passion in his heart. It's indifference, and as we have talked about before, routine can easily become, I'll call it boring, predictable, dispassionate, going through the motions, just over broke. Hopefully you recognize some of these terms from earlier parts of Tanya. That's a surefire sign of Atzvis. It doesn't even mean he's not doing what he's supposed to do, but there is no passion to it. And a surefire sign of holiness is passion. That's a surefire sign. Now, again, passion can also be hijacked. A person can become passionate about material things and about indulgences and so on and so forth. Got to be cautious about these things. Avo meriris v'lev nishbar. So the sort of more proper term that we are going to employ is the word meriris, like you recognize from Pesach, maror. Maror means bitter. But again, in English, when we say someone's bitter, we usually mean they're angry and nasty. It doesn't have that connotation. So don't confuse it with the English usage in literature of the person who's bitter, who's like a nasty, angry, resentful. It's not that quality. It's a person who's feeling a distance. I mean, again, just as I mentioned, why do we eat maror on Pesach? Pesach, we're leaving Egypt. What are we eating the maror for? And part of the reason is to remind us that if we are not aware of the maror, we're not going to leave Egypt. As long as we think Egypt is not so bad, it's not so bad. We're not likely to change. But when we recognize that there's maror in Egypt, then we're likely to leave. Because remember, the Seder is the night we're still in Egypt. We don't leave Egypt until the day. This isn't the Pesach class, but okay. So when a person has meriris and a broken heart, again, broken as in broken open, again, very important. And again, meriris promotes that, whereas atzvus squashes it. Again, proof is in the consequence. Atzvus results in inactivity, I give upness. Meriris evokes a renewed commitment and a greater gung-ho passion. Adarabba, hareish chayis believai. When a person has this meriris, they become impassioned. There is an explanation that when Moshe comes to Hashem at the burning bush, Hashem tells him to take off his shoes. Why does Hashem tell him to take his shoes off? So amongst the various explanations, we are taught that he has to feel the rocks under his feet. So he understands what the suffering of the Jewish people is. As long as he thinks that, it's not so bad and this is how it's always been, he's not going to be as motivated to, post haste, get himself down to Mitzrayim and get the Yidden out. There's got to be that feeling of pain. It's a harsh word, but when we feel that, it motivates us. It doesn't get us to give up. It says, I got to do something about this. It's that saying, the best way to solve a problem is to ignore it, then it'll become a crisis and you'll have to deal with it. That kind of thing. Okay. When there's meriris, again, we're sort of backing off this word atzvis, and they're real close to each other. When we back off of atzvis and we have meriris, it's healthy because it winds up in rah, 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 go team, go. Rachi chayis mevichinas gvura is kedushes. It is a chayis that comes from gevura, and gevura is about being self-analytical. I mean, the accountant is gevura, and that requires my gevura too. I don't want to think about it. Yeah, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. I know I'll pass the test. I know I'll have I don't want to be on a budget, whether it's a budget of money or my food or my behavior or my time. You know, they have these apps on your phone that they can tell you how much time you spend on your phone. Everybody installs it. 2 days later, they uninstall. I don't want to know that I spent 32 hours on my phone. I'm never on the phone. I'm never on the phone. Oh no, look at that. You can't deny it. It speaks the truth. So this is the consequence that it comes from gevura. But simcha comes from chesed. So to speak, which one is it? And our answer is that when it's kedusha, a surefire sign of kedusha is cooperation. Remember, in klipa, it's my way or the highway. Very much the Yaakov Esav dynamic. Esav is born Esav and he dies Esav. He never really develops. I'm done. This is who I am. End of story. Yaakov is born Yaakov. He's willing to disguise himself literally as Esav. He's willing to deal with Esav and so on, and he becomes Yisroel. The difference between Yaakov and Esav is that Yaakov is able to incorporate his Esavness and elevate it, whereas Esav is not willing to deal with his Yaakovness. So, in the side of holiness, Gevura can cooperate with Chesed. So even though our ultimate goal is to be of the service of Hashem with Simcha, and Simcha is the product of Chesed, and here we're starting out with Gevura, with this rigid self-analysis, but since it's Kedusha, there's not going to be a conflict between Chesed and Gevura. Gevura will gladly, pardon the pun, hand off its Simcha to Chesed. Whereas in Klippa, Gevura is like, no. Tell a quick story. I'm not sharing any secrets. But our friend David Sokoloff years ago used to work for Hallmark in Kansas City. And he was a cartoonist and an artist. And he said that in the campus, they had two distinct buildings, one for the artists and one for the business people. And in the business office, it was very rigid and everybody wore the gray flannel suit and so on. And on the artist side, they had music and they had paints and, because they didn't want the artist people to get numbed by the business people. And they didn't want the business people to get off track with the artists. But what they came to realize was if the business people didn't understand the artists and the artists didn't understand the business side, they couldn't have a successful company. So that's a true story. This is the lesson. In order for Kedusha to thrive, there has to be cooperation. As long as Chesed is Chesed, it's not willing to cooperate with Gevura, that's a sign of Klipa, my way and not your way. And this is how I do it, and I'm not willing to incorporate something else. So the Alter Rebbe is telling us that even though you're starting off with Gevura, harsh self-analysis, you still can come to Simcha, even though Simcha is from Chesed. How's Gevura going to get to Chesed? Because in Kedusha, a surefire sign of Kedusha is the ability to cooperate, because cooperation comes from Bittul. The only way to cooperate with someone else is to put aside my agenda for the greater agenda. Any form of a team is putting aside what I want for the greater objective and the greater good. Now, li'itim tzarich la'oira b'chinas gvuras hakedushas. At certain times, and again, here's where that handle with caution, that medicine analogy, all that stuff that we talked about, how careful we have to be with it. But sometimes it's worthwhile. In order to sweeten it. That is, the occasional mariris sweetens it. Again, it's not just dealing with the symptom, it's dealing with the cause. It's digging a little deeper. It's not so pleasant. But as we know, the only thing worse than getting a root canal is not getting the root canal, because they're not going to get better. And there's got to be some in-depth analysis of it. But again, the Alter Rebbe real cautious. At times, and we talked about this so often, who's the master of it versus who is sneaking up on you. Sheheim bechinas nefesh habahamis v'yetzahara. The dinim are from, that is, this harsh self-analysis is about my nefesh habahamis and my yetzahara. When they dominate the person, that's where it comes from. It comes because my animalistic, I want it, I'm grabbing it. Rawr, this kind of aggression comes from the nefesh habahamis. And this is something that we have heretofore recommended against, but it hasn't worked for this person, which is why we need another chapter. The Alter Rebbe says, and again, it has to be controlled by the person, not that it sneaks up on it, because things that's, anything that happens, oh, by the way, tends to not, that's how people get cheated. Oh, by the way, did I forget to mention? Oh, by the way, is how they pull a fast one on. So we have to be in control of it. And that control is to start looking into, via the Gevura of Kedusha, what is the source? Why is it? Now, I'm not getting all Freudian here, and everybody tell us about, when I was 4 years old, I call it out of the lines, and my teacher yelled at me. But conceptually, why is it that this distraction distracts me? Now, ordinarily, we're told, push it away, don't mess with it. It's just taking you down a rabbit hole where you're just going to become so consumed with talking about it and so on. You're just going to get all twisted upside down. But at times, it can be a useful mechanism to reach down into the source to sweeten this aggression. And therefore, we are told, that there is a value in, getting angry. Whenever necessary, be angry at that nefesh habahamis. Again, like Mitzrayim. As long as we think he's not so bad, we're not likely to do anything about it. Just to use the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, as an illustration. If we look closely in the story, the Bnei Yisrael never asked to leave Egypt. They only asked for the slavery to be less terrible. In part because they couldn't even imagine it. It's like in the 70s, we used to daven that it shouldn't be so bad in Russia. Why don't you daven they should leave? Don't be ridiculous. That's like davening that it won't be winter. You hope it won't be a bad winter, but you can't imagine that it won't be winter. Miracles that we live through, Baruch Hashem. Anyway, the idea being that as long as we think that we can work with the Yetzer Hara, it's not so bad, the likelihood of our eliminating it is up there with Neville Chamberlain. There's a good World War II reference. Meaning you can't appease the bad guy. You can't. But he keeps saying, I'm not such a bad guy. We can't appease the bad guy. Peace in our time is not our objective. There are Yetzer Haras that need to be absolutely confronted and not just coddled or given Slurpees and said, okay, that'll work out. And so on. The Yetzer Hara and the Nefesh habahamis are bad. They're unpleasant and they're out to disrupt my relationship with Hashem. And I can't just sort of kind of maybe tolerate it at wink wink. That is V'haina b'chol ace, at any moment. Why it says for always you should get angry. Always. Any moment. Sharoya benafsha, that a person recognizes in his soul, and this is that self-awareness thing that the Alter Rebbe talks about. It's become very popular. People being self-aware. You're doing it again. There it goes. This idea. Shetzarech lekach, that I need it. Anytime I see it, I should direct it. However, Shas HaKosher, the Alter Rebbe is telling you, a prime time, a time that's ready for this. Shisham yuchedes ruya lekach rei adam. When a person, it's a likely opportunity. When he's anyways sort of feeling, like we might call it, down in the dumps. There's an old saying, if you're peeling onions, you might as well do tshuva. Meaning, if you're anyways crying, you might as well do tshuva, might as well direct it to something of holiness. For no reason, that he's just feeling a little bit down in the dumps. So the Alter Rebbe says, seize that moment and use it to turn it around and make it about my spiritual imperfections, failings, and thus become motivated to fix them. And as a fringe benefit, it will dislodge the worries about material things. There is a story, Rashi brings it in the Chumash, that it says that when when Yaakov Avinu comes down to see Yosef in Mitzrayim, we can't even imagine the story. 22 years, he hadn't seen his son. He thought his son was dead. And now he's being reunited with his son. Who could even imagine how emotional that would be? You can't imagine. And it says at that moment that Yosef fell on Yaakov's shoulders and wept. And Rashi says, why doesn't it say that Yaakov fell on Yosef's shoulders and wept? So Rashi says that Yaakov was saying the Shema. So the Rebbe asked the question, now you're saying the Shema? You haven't seen your son in 22 years. You finally see him. Now I got to say the Shema. And if for some reason you're going to tell me that halacha mandates that you must say the Shema at this moment, so why isn't Yosef saying the Shema? So what's going on? Why is Yaakov deciding to say Shema now when he's going to see his son? I mean, what's going on? So Chassidus explains that it's an application, it's a little bit on the flip side, of this strategy. Who could imagine the emotion, the love, the gratitude? Who could imagine what Yaakov is feeling at that moment? Could there be a more passionate moment of love and enthusiasm and excitement and optimism and confidence and gratitude? Who could imagine? So Yaakov decides to direct that passion to Hashem. Just to play it out one more step. So he says, "Hear Israel," which is of course his name, Hashem, who is beyond our understanding, Elokeinu, even in our understanding, Hashem is Echad. Here I never thought I'd see Yosef again. Here I found out Yosef runs all of Egypt. I thought I'm going to find him as an Egyptian. Imagine what Egypt meant. It's like saying to somebody, his son is alive, but he's a Nazi. I mean, maybe I would prefer not. And here I'm reunited with my son. After 22 years, I thought he was dead. And he's still my son. This is truly Hashem Echad, the same thing. So that part's a little bit separate, but as is relevant to what the Alter Rebbe is recommending here, that when should a person do this? Again, we are being very, very cautious. Never, 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 never. Okay, this is how you do it. So cautious. Again, like medicine, using it appropriately. Is if the person is, as we say, saivi for anyways, is feeling down in the dumps. They're feeling concerned about material things and so on. So we're not looking to sit down and feel bad. Okay, make myself feel bad about things. It almost feels phony. But if the person finds themselves in that mode of mentality or mood, as we might call it, so we're telling him this is an opportunity to utilize it, profit from that suffering, turn it around, make it an even more intense type of atzvus, and as a fringe benefit, it will free you from worries about the earthly matters, which could be serious things. And again, it will reach down deeper and find something greater, and it will transform into something positive. And then you'll get a positive simcha out of it. So this is that a message of Pirkei Avos. A person should always be on the ready, that as soon as he feels his nefesh habahamis coming towards him, zero tolerance. That's a big message here. There's no like, oh, it'll just be a minute. No, you may not at all. I'm not letting you in. You wouldn't let, God forbid, a criminal in your house just for a minute. I mean, you wouldn't tolerate it just for a moment. So we got to see the nefesh habahamis in this type of on our guard mentality. And then here's the good news. Not only will it be a healthy usage of that experience, it will free the person from the worries about material things. I mean, there is a certain dynamic that is directed towards this word is maybe too shallow, worrying. That may be too shallow a word, maybe something a little bit more sophisticated for being concerned. It's going to go somewhere. It's like passion. It's going to go somewhere. Pirkei Avos, whoever throws off the yoke of Torah becomes yoked by something else. They're yoked by CNN, they're yoked by the government, they're yoked by this concern, that concern. So there is a certain dynamic within our identity that is, I'll call it worried, concerned. Think of a better word for it. It's either going to be worrying about nonsense, or it's going to be an opportunity, not just to worry about it, but to direct it, see it, identify it, and fix it. Because again, sometimes a person doesn't want to fix it, because then what am I going to worry about now? As long as what I'm worried about is something that I have controlled. So I'm always worried about it. I'm always worried about it. If I solve it, then where's my worry gene going to go? It's going to go to something more important. And I don't want to worry about something more important. I'd rather worry about, something off in the distance, global warming, than whether or not my child is learning their aleph base. Because if I'm worried about, global warming, I'm so worried about global warming. So I am scratching the itch of my worrying concern, and I'm not really dealing with anything. Okay. This will then bring the person to a true simcha. Now, what is the difference between a simcha and a true simcha? So we recall from previous chapters in Tanya, when we say that something is true, we don't mean the opposite of saying it's a lie. We mean it is sustainable. Like the word emes is the first, middle, and last letter of the aleph base, aleph, mem, taf. Similarly, truth means it's true under all circumstances. It can withstand all. There's a curious halacha that describes why we use an esrog. What is it about an esrog? What's called a beautiful fruit. One of its beauties is it's an all-season fruit. It lives through all the seasons, which is sort of the message that we live through all the seasons. Good days, better days, not such gooder days, et cetera, et cetera. The height of this means that this will comfort the person as a double form of comfort, meaning the Alter Rebbe is guaranteeing it'll bring the person to simcha. That's a pretty bold statement. What does he mean? After we have expressed these words and this message of truth, the person says to his heart. Now remember, we have talked about this before, very important. The tzaddik, or the righteous person, even though we're not talking about tzaddikim here, but we're following the model, speaks to his heart. The wicked person speaks in his heart. Hashem said, Vayemer Hashem el liboy. God said to his heart when he was talking about bringing the flood. David HaMelech says to his heart. In contrast, Esav, when he finds out that his brother disguised himself as him to get the bracha, says in his heart, my father's going to die and then I'm going to kill Yaakov. When the Achashverosh asks Haman, what do I do for someone to whom I wish to show honor? Haman said in his heart, the king means me. So the Russia, and here we're not just talking about the Tanya definition, but the bad guy, the sort of more vernacular usage of the word bad, he is dictated, speaks in his heart, whereas the righteous person speaks to his heart. He controls it, he masters it. An important nuance. He says to his heart, Emesu, okay, it is true. Beli safek, and there's no doubt. Shani rachak me'oid mi Hashem betachlis u'meshukas u'metoiv. I'm bad, I'm terrible, I'm far from God, etc. Kol zehu ani levadi, hu aguf. But that's my guf, with my animating life. That's not my entirety. That's part of me, my body. And my body is me. I'm hungry, I'm tired, my hair's on fire. Me. All I'm worried about is myself. As Rabbi Jonathan Sachs was fond of quoting a particular story where somebody wrote to the Rebbe. It wasn't Rabbi Sachs. And they wrote something along the lines as, I have no friends, and I have no hope, and I have nothing to look forward to, and I have no joy. And the Rebbe answered by just circling that word. It's all about I. If I see everything through me, of course I have no hope, joy, or friends. So, right, it's true. But I have a part of God within me. Oh, that guy? Yeah. How do I know? I do. I feel Kal Shebakam, even the worst guys got it. So I must have it. I am still have a part of godliness within me. So again, remember we talked about this before. When Rivki Imenu is pregnant with twins and they quarrel within her, she goes to inquire of Hashem and she says, "What's the point?" In other words, I thought I grew up with bad people. Remember, her father Basual was so bad that God killed him, and her brother Lavan doesn't turn out to be much better, and he abuses Yaakov and so on. So those are bad people. So of course they're bad. But now I'm with good people. So how come now that I'm with good people, I don't have good? How come I still got conflict? So the answer is, it's a combo deal. We are part human and part spiritual. We're not only human. We're not human animals. We're human, homo spiritus, part human, part spiritual entity. And that spiritual entity is still within us, even though it's true that my humanity is only interested in me, I still got a godly spark. She never shall keys, which is my godly spark, it came with the packaging. It's not the result of something that I earned because I ate latkes, because I scored first in the Hebrew school. It's because that's how you come out of the factory. With an actual spark of God invested within it, to give it life. But it's hidden. And therefore, Adra, Kol Mashani Batach Zarikus, Mashem, Bativa Shikus, by never shall a key should be, but Golas Godel Yaser. So here the Alter Rebbe turns it around and makes it into a strategy for success and says, look, now that I realize that I got this yucky, goofy goof that is dragging me down, that's keeping me separate from Hashem, and I also have this godly soul that is longing to be connected with God like a child is to its parent. And even if I'm a bad guy and I'm terrible, there's no matter what, I have this godly soul. It is as pure as the day it was given to me. We say it each morning in the davening, Hashem, the soul you gave me is pure. So therefore, I should have simple Rahmanis. So here's a different strategy the Alter Rebbe says. The Rahmanis Allah Gadol Miyoid. This is a great Rahmanis. So I'll tell you a quick story. Our friend, Rabbi Naftali Hershkowitz, people know, from Free and Niles. So he was once driving back from New York. And, it's like one of these crazy stories. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning. He's in somewhere in rural Pennsylvania. And the gas gauge is starting to read excellent. So, there's no GPS. This is 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. And then Hashem, there's an exit and there's a gas station. It's 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is. So thank God, he makes it in and he's putting gas in the car. And there's the clerk who works there in rural Pennsylvania. So he goes in there and he sees the guy and the guy says, let me like, shalom. So you can't believe it. So he starts talking, are you Jewish? Yes. Yeah. What a story. You got to put on film. No, I'm not putting on film. Come on. Look at this. Hashem directed me, gave him the whole spiel. No, he's not. No. He gave up. Then he said, look, let me ask you a question. If I asked you for a cup of coffee, would you give me a cup of coffee? He said, yeah, sure. So I'm asking you to do me a favor and put on the film. The guy said, okay. The point being, the Nefesh HaBahamis is terrible. I'm terrible. You know what? My Nefesh Elokis, have Rachmanis. I mean, have simple compassion on my poor neshama that's trapped in this body and is so distant from Hashem. So I keep saying, I'm terrible. You're right, you are terrible. And look where your godly soul is. It's trapped in all this terribleness. So here the Alter Rebbe takes this approach to simply have Rachmanis on the Nefesh Elokis that I have dragged to places it doesn't want to go. And this will now become my new passion and my new mission, to free it, and to elevate it, from this terrible gullus, and bring it back to where it was. This poor nefesh elokis is trapped in my body, and my body is sometimes interested in me. So, in saying, yeah, have rachmanis, have simple compassion. If they ask you for a cup of coffee, you give it to me. Have simple compassion and let it free, and bring it back to where it was. That it was subsumed, and attached. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. With Hashem's light, and was absolutely one with him. The Gamata came. That's how it is now. So it's trapped. That it should again be reunited with Hashem. I will place all of my mission, not for my sake, but for my neshama. Remember, we read about Hillel. He was the opposite. Hillel considered his body to be a stranger. So when he went to eat, he would say, I'm going to do a favor for my stranger. But here, we, not us, we're perfect. We tend to think of our nefesh elokis as being the guest. I am my humanity, and my nefesh elokis is a guest. So if I have a guest, I'm going to be nice to him. And if someone's trapped, I'm not going to say, well, I'm going home. I'm going to free him. So that's what the Alter Rebbe is applying, this similar type of strategy. Ubefrat, and the specific mechanism is b'mitzvah tefillah, the mitzvah of davening. L'tzoyek al Hashem b'tzalem migolusay, u'gufay hamashukitz le'siyim imizgo dafka b'yisbarach. And again, as we have talked about before, the distinctive characteristic of davening is the recognition of there's something bigger than me, that there's something outside of me. And therefore, my neshama is crying out, I'm stuck down here. Help. And this is what it means that we do tshuva and good deeds. The good deeds is like I help another person. So Hillel considered his body another person. He considered it a good deed to help his body. That's hungry. The Alter Rebbe is recommending that we do sort of the reverse. We have Rachmanis on our trapped nefesh elokis, and we do him the favor. And if we'll take this attitude, this is another strategy to release our nefesh elokis from its being encased in this klipa of the body, and to let it fly free and return it to its origin. All right. To be continued.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you.
Thursday is the yard site of our friend Yaakov Chaim Moshe Ben Yishayo, Mark Pomerantz. We have refurbished the Torah. Rabbi Nathan said he'll have it here, Mitzvah Hashem, on Thursday. He ordered a new mantle. I hope that'll be here by Thursday, but I'll send out the picture of it. Baruch Hashem. So that's a nice mitzvah. Neshama should have an aliyah. Okay.
Have a good week. Thank you.
Have a wonderful week, everybody. I'll send out the recording.
Thank you.